everyone. Welcome to another episode of What If? It's Matt.
And it's Zach.
This is a fairly new show that we have. This is only the second episode that we've done for it. And essentially what we're doing here is we're looking at different areas of music and saying, well, what if that happened and not this? And this particular episode, we're talking about a little album that you might have heard of called American Idiot.
Slightly successful, right?
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit.
But did you know that Green Day may not have released American Idiot at one point in time? And what if American Idiot was never released?
Shocking to believe, especially considering how literally American Idiot, dare I say, might have been one of, if not the biggest rock albums of the past nearly 20 years. I mean, when you talk about big rock albums with that, essentially cause like just big, massive events, American Idiot might have been the last rock album to really do that and to also still stand the test of time and to live up to that hype. Again, it came out in 2004, nearly 20 years ago, and it not only revitalized Green Day's career, but kind of ushered in a new era of rock, one that took elements of the classic rock, but just kind of gave it a little bit more of a punk edge and added some more politics, just heartache, and a lot of this frustrations and stress that a lot of people felt at the time, both with the current political climate or that time of climate and just in their own personal lives. But as Matt alluded to, it almost didn't come out. So, Matt, do you mind if I give a little quick history lesson?
I didn't know this was school, but sure, go ahead.
And I will test you on this later. No, but let's also first paint a little picture here. It's the year 2003.
We're in art class now? I thought we were in history class.
Picture this. Green Day are at a point in their career in 2003 that they're kind of in a bit of a slump. The last two albums that they released, in particular Warning, that came out in 2000, it wasn't really that well received. It was just mixed reviews at best. They were kind of on the edge of being considered veterans. I mean, pop punk was at its all-time high. And while, they were co-headlining tours with Blink-182, it was definitely at a time when they weren't as big of a draw as they used to be. Dookie had already been nearly 10 years old at that point. On top of that, they were kind of all stressed out. They were annoyed at just the current state of their band. And at one point, Billie Joe was even going, should we even continue doing this? What are we doing? In 2003, they decided to start an album they were telling everyone, it's back to our punk roots. It's going to be the kick in the butt that we need. At least that's what they were telling themselves. That album was Cigarettes and Valentines. And recording was going fine when suddenly, after they recorded most of the album, the master tapes were stolen. All of the work they were doing, gone. And in most cases, some bands would be freaking out. They'd be going, what the heck? Our baby has been stolen. What do we do? What do we do? And instead of them re-recording it or even just trying to find the tapes or go into panic mode, they had a hard conversation with their longtime producer and collaborator, Rob Cavallo. And Rob even just flat out asked them, like, guys, is there anything that you're really emotionally attached to this album? And they kind of all just realized, you know what? It really wasn't our best work. They literally have gone on to say, yeah, it was a blessing in disguise because they didn't feel emotionally enough connected to be like, oh my God, we need to find this album. Instead, they were like, you know what? This is a sign that we need to start from scratch. And yeah, they started from scratch. They ended up going to work on an album that revitalized the rock opera format that incorporated not only concepts and storylines that was unique to them at the time, but just finally accepted what they thought a rock star band should sound like. And it's funny because even like as they were recording, they're like, oh, we found the master tapes. They're like, cool. Nah, we're good. And they just continue on. So it almost makes you wonder, and this is why we're here right now, what if they were so disillusioned, they were like, no, let's just find the tapes or we'll just re-record Cigarettes and Valentines. What if they did not feel inspired to start from scratch? What if they actually did not release American Idiot and instead released Cigarettes and Valentines? Crazy concept, right?
Well, so first off, I have a lot of feelings about this because
continue.
I call bullshit. I call bullshit.
Oh, hot take.
It's not really a hot take. I just think that those tapes weren't stolen. I think that's what they told everybody. because they, like you said, weren't emotionally attached to the work, and they were like, how do we play this off and how do we get more studio time? Hey, you got a friend who can come in here and just take these tapes and put them somewhere where we don't know where they are?
So you think they staged the robbery?
Exactly. I think they did something to get this material out of the studio where they didn't know where it was, so it was quote unquote stolen, because there is a live album called Awesome as Fuck where you can listen to the title track to that album, Cigarettes and Valentines. And let me tell you, it is a very mediocre Green Day song.
Well, and also they've even said that they found the masters, and they keep it in a vault. Well, they kept it in a vault, and I think it's the song Youngblood on Revolution Radio. That they're like, yeah, we kind of took a song from 2003 sessions and, you know, revamped it a little bit. It's kind of unclear as to how much of the original song that they kept, but I'm curious as to whether or not, I don't know if it was the band that decided, all right, let's just say that we lost the tapes and start from scratch, as much as I almost wonder if it was management. It was like, you know what? It's clear these guys don't like this. Let's do them a favor and take it away from them to begin with. Because I think it's also interesting the fact that they still keep it in the vault and apparently occasionally still go back to the material. We're like, all right, what can we reuse here? Which is also kind of a sad statement right there. If it's an album that you weren't attached to nearly 20 years ago, why are you still using it?
Right. You're saying it yourself right there. It's like, oh, well, what can we repurpose this as? So you're telling me that you were working on this killer album and it disappeared. Everything disappeared. You magically found it again and you're reusing the songs instead of releasing the songs. Right. They did what they had to do. And so let's talk about it from the perspective of, we know that this was, quote, stolen. So let's say it wasn't stolen, right? Let's go back to that premise that this wasn't stolen and they continued on. What would have happened if they never did American Idiot, right? I honestly believe that you would have had Green Day as a high-priced nostalgia act.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's honestly I think that's fair to assume. I mean, I think you can even make the argument that they were already kind of going that route. I mean, you could argue that the Blink-182 co-headline tour that they did, I think Newfound Glory and maybe Jimmy World were on that tour. It really was like a handing of the torch kind of scenario. I think maybe they could have done amphitheaters, but it would have to be like them and three other. I hate to say this. Sorry, I love The Offspring, but they probably would have ended up becoming the way of The Offspring, where it's like either they play big theaters or amphitheaters with a big package tour. Yeah, like they wouldn't be relevant.
Yeah, they wouldn't have been playing stadiums. Like they wouldn't have played Citi Field right after COVID. Yeah, and headline that whole thing.
They probably wouldn't even be festival headliners.
No, like if you think about their career after American Idiot, let's just once again assume Cigarettes and Valentines was the release that we think it's going to be, is a very just mediocre run-of-the-mill type thing, because even Green Day seems to talk about it from that perspective. 21st Century Breakdown. Let's think of that album. That album was a very much so second piece to American Idiot that wasn't great. It was okay.
That album needed trimming desperately. We could probably do a whole episode just dedicated to that album too, because I think we even talked about this. So maybe when we were talking about best concept albums, there were some really cool ideas. I actually liked the concept of that album better, like thematically. But some of the songs that are good are too long, and some songs I'm like, no, this is just filler. Right. Whereas American Idiot from start to finish is just a masterpiece.
Correct.
But go ahead. Sorry.
I'm going to keep going down the timeline after Cigarettes and Vignettes would have been the album, or Cigarettes and Valentines. Excuse me. I don't know why I said vignettes. So Cigarettes and Valentines.
I was thinking that too. I think I made that mistake too when I was like preparing for this episode, like at least twice. I'm glad I'm not the only one who trips over words anymore.
All right. So let's see. So it's Cigarettes and Valentines, then 21st Century Breakdown. Side note, do you even think 21st Century Breakdown would have been an album if American Idiot?
Oh, no, absolutely not. No. Okay. 21st Century Breakdown was them trying to continue the winning streak that they did of American Idiot.
Okay, good. So then we can successfully strike that album out of here too, because that would have never happened.
I think it's fair to say, I mean, even sorry to interrupt your timeline here, but from a sonic point, I think it would have all been just downhill nostalgic punk albums from Green Day if they had continued the route of Cigarettes and Valentines.
Okay, great. So then we agree that Uno, Dos, and Tre, the mediocre albums that those were, would have probably still come out too.
Oh, absolutely.
Right, and they were mediocre,
At
forgetful
there was
albums. Yeah.
maybe 3 songs, and I think I'm being too generous with that too, that actually stood out as pretty good. But even that did not need to be a 3-album piece.
Right. Let's see. Then they released something called Demolicious, which is a bunch of just demos.
Yeah, I mean,
I wonder,
we don't need to count that.
Right, I wonder if part of Cigarettes and Valentines was repurposed for that, but let's move on from there.
It doesn't sound like it, though. From what I've read in interviews, they really kind of kept things in the vault.
Okay.
Again, I could be wrong.
Then Revolution Radio. I think that could have been a potential album in this new timeline. It didn't sound anything like American Idiot or 21st Century Breakdown.
I don't know about that. I think Revolutionary Radio was also, because that was definitely a more politically driven album that would have, that I think after the unsuccess, I mean, because the Uno Dos Tres album was not very well received. And also keep in mind, Billie Joe was having the meltdown at the iHeartRadio festival thing. And, you know, let's kind of go back to that punk rock protest vibe that we had of American Idiot, you know, recapture that vibe that we know fans love. I think that was a response to them trying to get back in good graces with the fans that they got from American Idiot. Okay. So I don't know if they would have made that album.
All right. And then finally, the father of all.
You know what? Let's just save our
breath.
Yeah, let's just save our breath there. We did a 2 minutes review episode on the father of all. Go ahead and listen to that if you really want to. But as Matt said, dumpster fire. I don't even know if that album. I don't know where their minds were going with that album. Let's just actually, that album would not have existed without American Idiot, because that album cover is literally just the American Idiot cover with some really poorly drawn unicorn on it.
So
you know, you realize, I mean, you know that it's like the laziest album that Green Day has ever done, and we say that with so much love for Green Day. We love you, Green Day. We really, really do.
So as you can see, this timeline has a bunch of mediocre, low-end albums on it without highlights of American Idiot, dare I say 21st Century Breakdown, and Revolution Radio, which are all stems off of American Idiot. So
I mean, no, I think it's clear that, and we even said this in the beginning, American Idiot revitalized the band.
Revitalized. It is completely responsible for their next 18 years of fame.
Absolutely. They would not, absolutely. They would not be relevant without American Idiot again. Everyone would love Dookie and have time, you know, would write love letters about it, but
that's it.
Nostalgic. But they're Green Day, even with all the mediocre albums that they've done in the past 5-7 years, they're still relevant, and it's because of American Idiot.
And with people are kept being reminded of American Idiot because it's transcended from just an album. It actually is. It was a Broadway play at one point.
You know, it's funny though.
Broadway, excuse me.
No, it was yes, it was. It was a Broadway play.
It was on Broadway.
Oh yeah, it was on
Broadway play.
But I actually say that Broadway play, I don't know if it's ever really been that well received. In fact, it's funny because I actually feel like 21st Century Breakdown kind of got screwed because of American Idiot, because that album was so successful and kept getting second lives within itself. Even going into 2006, they were touring in support of American Idiot. It was that popular. By the time that they were finally like, all right, cool, we can slow down, 2009, let's move on to the next phase of our lives. That's when the Broadway show comes out. I'm like, damn it. Like, they were able to convince them to throw in a few, I think 21 Guns, at least 21 Guns, and not 2 other songs from 21st Century Breakdown were included in the Broadway play. But that literally, no matter what Green Day did at that point, they couldn't escape American Idiot. It was that huge of an album. I mean, granted, the response and anticipation for American Idiot, the second that the title track hit radio, was huge. I remember at the very beginning of the album cycle seeing Green Day in the lacrosse. I'm going to mispronounce the name. The lacrosse center, Temple University in Philadelphia. Their stadium. It's not stadium. The arena. It's an arena, but it's a smaller arena that hosts basketball games normally and a few concerts and events. And then a year from then, so that was September of 2024 when I saw that show, and it was incredible. And it was, of course, already huge excitement. But then a year later, seeing them
September of 2024. Did you go in the future?
Sorry, September of 2004 is when I saw that show at Temple University. And then the following year, they were playing the then Wachovia Center, 2005. So literally within a year, they doubled the capacity of arenas that they could play and sell out. And it was just phenomenal to see how the response and love for that album just kept growing and growing and growing to the point that you could almost argue that maybe they felt suffocated by how massive an album it was. So I think we've kind of agreed that Green Day would, of course, they would just become a nostalgic act if it wasn't for American Idiot. What would have happened to the overall rock scene in the 2000s if American Idiot didn't come out? I would argue that it would have been a dismal decade for rock music, maybe even music in general, if that album didn't come out. That's how big of an album it was. That album, I mean, yes, 3 Cheers for Sweet Revenge from My Chemical Romance technically came out before American Idiot. And, you can make an argument that a lot of bands were kind of doing some of the elements that Green Day was trying to incorporate into its music before they did. But Green Day with American Idiot opened the doors for a new wave of rock bands to become popular, dare I say. That without Green Day kicking the door, because they were already established, they were established after that point, but they were the rock band of the 2000s. They kind of helped bands like My Chemical Romance and Fall Out Boy reach a larger audience and gave rock a new purpose in that decade. I gotta believe that rock would have looked a hell of a lot different if American Idiot didn't come out.
So I'm going to talk about my absolute favorite genre of rock music. We're going to call it post-grunge.
Oh, right? You love that genre. Which we may or may not have talked about during a past Am I Missing Something episode involving your favorite band, Creed.
So post-grunge is technically still going on because it's after grunge. But if you think about some of the bands that became popular in post-grunge, I think that is your predominant music that if American Idiot didn't become popular, that's all you would really have. So post-grunge, I think, took a little bit of a backseat, or at least there was a different flavor offered once American Idiot came out, because that did allow bands to see that, yeah, you can have a little swagger. Yeah, you still can kind of fight the establishment. You can have more than just this generic rock radio sound and be successful. To your point of My Chemical Romance, Fall Out Boy, hell, that could have even have led slightly to the rise of emo, if you think about it.
American Idiot definitely did, because again, sure, My Chemical Romance and Fall Out Boy were starting before American Idiot came out and became big. And there's some fans who argue that Green Day ripped off My Chemical Romance style. But seeing Green Day look with the eyeliner and, that look, that led to a bunch of bands taking on that emo rock look, for sure. And in fact, I'm going to pose another hot take. Did American Idiot kill nu metal? Or was American Idiot the final coffin in the nu metal, rap metal scene, in your opinion?
I think people were just getting tired of it.
People were definitely tired of it, but I mean, at the same time, though, to your point, there wasn't really an alternative at that point. And then finally, here comes Green Day with a little bit more of a rock sound. Around that same time, I think it was the year before, or maybe the same year, where the year before, where Foo Fighters came out with their album, One by One. There was finally some more alternatives there, but you could argue that nu metal was still on its last leg until Green Day came in and just kicked the final leg off of them, and they fell down.
I think,
but you know what I mean.
I think right place, right time, right? So instead of you having a one-legged table, you just have a piece of wood on the floor. I think that's really what it was. Like you said, nu metal was on its last leg. You kick the last leg out, it's just a piece of wood on the floor. And
could another band have done that then?
I think it might have taken a little bit longer. I think it would have eventually faded away instead of definitively say, okay, Green Day, American Idiot led to, this whole breath of fresh air in the music world at that point. I think Limp Bizkit releasing considerably more awful records as what would have eventually killed it, and people would have pointed at that instead of saying Green Day did it.
You mentioned about American Idiot, a fresh breath of something new and different. It almost feels like, I'm not comparing the sound necessarily, but if you kind of look at when Nevermind from Nirvana hit, it was sounding so different and was hitting a nerve. Like people were getting tired of just the partying and the, you know, debauchery kind of themes of rock music at the time. And here came Nirvana and bands like Pearl Jam and Soundgarden that was like, no, let's talk about something more real and dark and just real and real anger, not packaged rebellion, as they would say about certain bands from the hair metal scene. Here came Green Day with a very rock-driven album that wasn't about just even like if you even look at like Blink-182, they were trying to go in a little bit more of a serious route with their self-titled album, but then that kind of got. I mean, of course, we all love the song "Miss You," but you can even argue that that didn't have as much of an impact as they probably hoped it did. You talked about the right place at the right time, and at that point in 2004, we were in the midst of a war in Iraq that a lot of people felt wasn't right that we were doing. That we shouldn't be in Iraq at all, let alone at war. A lot of anger still about the events of 9/11. A lot of just emotions at high, and a lot more young people like who had more means to be exposed to that real world crisis, feeling unheard. And on top of that, going through their own personal problems. I think it was, yeah, to your point, right place, right time, and presenting something new and finally letting people like, you know what, I'm tired of happy-go-lucky music. I am angry. I am frustrated. I'm not happy where I am. And while it was definitely a little bit more on the popular side than some of the early 90s albums, American Idiot provided young people that anger voice. It provided me that voice of anger and frustration. I was in my early teens and I finally felt like I just had an album that saw me in a weird way. Not I had a great childhood. I'm not going to deny that, but just it made young people feel like they finally had their protest music at what was going on.
Agreed. And I don't think there was any other bands at that time that would have dared to try it
Yeah.
the way that Green Day did, because other albums that came out in 2004, the same year that American Idiot came out, Modest Mouse, Good News for People Who Love Bad, and we'll just leave it at that. Franz Ferdinand came out with their debut album. U2 came out with How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb. And if that was their way of kind of being political, it was not very good. The Killers, they're not going to be political. They had a very happy sounding album in Hot Fuss. Great album, but it definitely is not politically charged at all. Jimmy Eat World came out with Futures. The Kings of Leon came out with Aha Shake Heartbreak. Newfound Glory came out with Catalyst. There's another punk rock band that necessarily wasn't doing the political scene. They were doing, the feelings thing. Let's see, any other ones?
It's funny. To stop you for a second, you talked about like,
Yep.
there's a band that's doing the more feeling things. I think yes, there's a lot of feeling with American Idiot, but I think because then you had songs like "Give Me Novocaine" and "When Wake Me Up When September Ends." That was definitely more on the emotional side. But what I think, and what made emo rock, as much as people love to diss it, special was that it had a lot more of those sad moments, but gave it a sense of power. It wasn't just I'm sad and I'm going to have music reflect the sadness. It was good. It's a guitar-driven album. There is something to be said about the power of just in-your-face guitar, heavy distorted riffs. And that album had the perfect mix of emotion, but also just actual anger and actual just oomph, if that makes sense. It wasn't just I'm going to sit in my room and feel sorry for myself. No, I'm actually going to stand up and be a freaking voice that you will not deny.
Right. There's a lot of different emotions. When I say like Newfound Glory was doing the emotional thing, like they were doing it from the perspective of inward emotions. Like they're
No, of course.
how I feel, how you made me feel. I'm feeling kind of, you know, down, or kind of empowering that I'm not going to feel down anymore, like emotionally myself. But American Idiot, with the political charge behind it, it's how I feel about something else that you can't hear me in any other way other than expressing it through this album, which is going to reach a lot of people. And I know that there's a lot of other people out there that feel the exact same way.
And even like, again, like there's a lot of inward emotion on American Idiot too, but there wasn't a rock album that sounded that sounded so larger than life than American Idiot. It brought back the larger than life ambiance that albums that Queen or The Who had in the 70s.
It was
That's what
right.
made
It
it so
was
special and connected to. It wasn't even that like, oh, it's a classic rock sounding album. Like, no, it's the same feeling that you got from seeing Roger Daltrey or Freddie Mercury on stage playing to a packed stadium while listening to this album.
this album and the albums that you mentioned are concept albums done the right way. It's not a concept just for it being a concept. We wanted to throw together this cool little story, and you're confused to hell by what you're listening to.
Mm-hmm.
This was honestly, I would say that this is one of the bigger concept albums and one of the best concept albums that have ever come out, because it spoke about more than just this story that we came up with. It's about America and the relevancy of what was going on at the time, and just the entire climate from the early 2000s is encapsulated in that album in a very special way.
It proved that concept albums can be personal, that it can be relatable. And I think, yeah, at the time, it's,
Yep.
you usually think of concept albums as, otherworldly or just like, fictional. And it's like, here's a concept album that I feel like is so real that there's no way it could not be based on something true. It's like
Yeah.
captured both what was going on in the news, but also what was going on in people's personal lives in so many ways.
Right. It made everything 100% relatable because everybody was living through it. Like one concept album that I keep going to in my head is Stone Sour, right? They put together two back-to-back albums that were part of the same concept, The House of Golden Bones. I didn't know what the hell the concept was. I still don't know what the concept is, but they said it's a concept album. Okay, great. It's telling a story. What's the story? What's it about? I don't know. Right. And like with Green Day, you didn't even have to guess, about what the concept was. When they start making fun of the governor of California and he's speaking German, obviously they're talking about Arnold Schwarzenegger being the governor of California at the time. Like there's so much that's on there about every political figure, and you know exactly what it is if you live through that time period.
And even just like, without going into like, they're referencing this in the news and that, even just like the characters that they created were just so relatable. You can just picture yourself being like, I know a what's her name. I know a Jesus of Suburbia. I know Saint Jimmy in my life. Like they created characters that were rooted in real life people that everyone probably could say, yeah, that's my life. It captured teenage angst in the 2000s better than any band could have. And that's kind of saying a lot and a little awkward if you think about it, considering that it was done by a trio of men that were in their late 30s?
Well,
Definitely not in their teenagers' years.
But it's also not pandering. That's important to note.
That's very true.
Because we talked about it when we reviewed Blink-182's album 9. That album sounded like 40-year-olds at a teenager's party, or they were trying to recapture their teenage youth again. Green Day sounds youthful. They don't try to be something that they're not at that point. They're they're talking very relevant. They're talking very on point. They're talking and creating things that are relatable to a lot of different people, like we've been
Not
saying.
Yeah, not to get
But
too
but
sidetracked.
yeah,
With Nine, I think you gave that album a little too much credit there because I don't even think it was like, oh, they're trying to relive their teenager years. That sounded like a bunch of 40-year-olds going to a teenage party, going, "Hey, I'm cool, I'm hip," even though clearly they're 40-year-olds looking ridiculous being at that party and kind of creepy. To your point, though, of American Idiot, not pandering, and it just, I think that's also why it's still such a great album, is that it's still so relatable. It even with the, if you don't know what some of the topics were at the time in context, it's still hit, and I think that's what makes it so poignant and almost kind of sad in that, like, man, there is still that angst and that divide and emotional, like, just trauma going on in the world. It captured what was going on at the time, but it also kind of highlights, like, yeah, this is still an ongoing thing.
I wonder if, and this is, me being an old man for a second here, I wonder if teenagers now listening to that, if they get the same feelings that we get. Like, it's easier for us to say that we feel that it's,
Yeah.
it's so still there. It's so still relevant. It feels like you can relate to it. But for people who are younger than us that are in their teenage years and they listen to Green Day, are they listening to it? Are they getting that charge that we think that they're getting? I would hope that the answer is yes, because it is such an amazing and an important album. But then again, it could be like me trying to and this is going to be like sacrilegious to some people, but it's going to be like me trying to listen to The Who's Tommy. I don't necessarily like it, and I feel nothing for it.
Yeah, that is sacrilegious because it's an amazing album. But side note, I to your initial question, I'm inclined to say yes. If you had asked me 5 years ago when we were about to celebrate the 15th anniversary, I'd say yes, because I like, even seeing my then younger nephew who is now off to college now, which is, if you want to talk about making me feel old, even he was going, "Wow, this is an amazing album." Like, I think then that it's if you want proof that this album is still resonating, like, I feel like you are, like, there's still headlining festivals. They're still talked about amongst a huge, like, to the point of this episode, like, what if they would have been just a nostalgia act? Now they're not, because of American Idiot. And I think that's proof that, yeah, young people still are resonating that album.
Or
Again,
is it
I would be
is it
more
us
confident.
that's buying those tickets?
Well, no, because listen, there is a ton of young people when we saw Green Day right after COVID. Side note, for those of you who did not listen to a past I'm Missing Something episode where we review our experience of the first concert after the start of the pandemic, the first show Matt and I saw after the pandemic started was Green Day with Weezer at Citi Field in Queens, New York. Fall Out Boy was supposed to play it. They got COVID, or someone in their camp got COVID, so they couldn't play. Made us a lot, feel really safe about playing and going to that show. But if you remember, Matt, other than us freaking out that here we were amongst people not wearing masks at the time, there was a lot of young people there. And I would argue there are a lot of young people who dragged their parents there, not necessarily the other way around.
I mean, that's a toss up, the last part, but yes, there were a lot of younger people that were at the show. But I would hope that we are still getting those same feelings from the album, from the younger people, than than us just thinking it's that way, because it really is a great album, like start to finish. There's no denying it. And for the miss that Green Day could have had, they had just as big of a hit with this one.
And I do feel that it's scary to think what could have happened in the rock scene if it wasn't for American Idiot. Because
hashtag yay crime in this instance.
And before we wrap it up, Matt, favorite song off of American Idiot?
it is going to be American Idiot.
Really?
Yeah, it holds a special place with me because my cover band and I played it, and it was one of the very first songs that we actually learned as a cover band together, and we unanimously agreed on playing it because of just how amazing that song and album was.
So for me, I would say the best song on American Idiot is Jesus of Suburbia. That whole
Yes.
suite, it's just brilliant. My favorite song, though, is Give Me Novocaine. I don't even know why, but I kind of always get a little bit emotional hearing it. I just think it is one of those, the way it starts, it's just so beautiful, and that chorus just hits you like a ton of bricks. It's just, it really is just a beautiful song, and it almost, like I said before, it really does do a great job of capturing both the inward emotion with the larger than life aspects of it. It's one of those songs I don't think gets enough love, and I love that guitar solo. I love that guitar solo. I think that's another thing that album needs to get more credit for. It's not flashy, virtuoso guitar solo playing, but it did kind of help bring back some of guitar solos in punk rock.
And actually, one more thing about American Idiot and it being one of my favorite off the album is when I got a chance to see them in 2015, 2016.
2016, I remember because I'm
Yeah.
still jealous of this.
So Green Day played a string of extremely small clubs, and they came to the Starland Ballroom here in New Jersey. This is probably a 2,000 to 3,000 at best venue.
Oh, I don't even think that many people. No, there's
close,
no way.
but it's super small for a band of Green Day size. Super small, and they were doing this as a warm up to a tour. And I got a chance to get tickets, and the energy off of American Idiot was unlike anything I've seen before. I'm sure as you can find videos on the internet, and I'm sure if I go far back in my Apple history, I can find a video, but the energy that was in that room that night for American Idiot was stupid. And it just
was
shows
idiotic. Did it?
Yes. You could have powered New York City probably for a week with the energy that's in that room. It was insane. And there were no big flashy stage productions. There were only like simple house lights. Like if you could picture like a 70s concert with lighting, like that's pretty much what it was on a smaller scale. And the songs, the energy, you could feel the band believe in the music that they were playing, and everybody just feeding off of that energy. Just that place was electric, and I haven't seen anything like that since.
You mentioned two things: the idea of electricity and just how electric the whole. I would argue that every time they play a song off of American Idiot, it is just the energy that they perform those songs with is still to this day amazing. I mean, I would make the argument. I've seen Green Day now live 5 times, and they've basically done a similar kind of show since with American Idiot, and yet it's still an incredible rock show to witness. Going back to the whole purpose of this episode of What If, I gotta believe that not only would they have become a nostalgia act, but that level of energy, that level of purpose on stage would be completely gone if Green Day did not release American Idiot or make American Idiot. Like, we cannot emphasize enough how much that album recharged Green Day and gave us one of the most energetic and, dare I say, important bands in rock. Nothing against Dookie, great album, but I have to believe that if it wasn't for American Idiot, we'd be just saying, "Oh, Dookie, a great album. Wonder what Green Day is kind of up to." Whereas Green Day is a great band. You've heard American Idiot, right? It's like reverse the conversation. it gave a new purpose to Green Day that would have been completely lost. We probably wouldn't even be talking about Green Day right now.
No, it's just kind of like we don't talk about The Offspring anymore after Let the Bad Times Roll because...
Well, that album was just...
Right. But that's the whole point is Green Day became ultra important in the landscape of rock from that album and that album alone, where we could be having a completely, like you just said, we had a completely different conversation about, well, where are they now? Kind of like what we were talking about with the Creed Cruise episode. Here's a whole bunch of bands that, oh wow, look, they're here. What are they doing before this? I don't know. Maybe they were playing like a small like town festival or something. I don't know, but definitely not on the same level as what Green Day became.
Dookie made Green Day influential. American Idiot made Green Day important. And I have to believe that if without American Idiot, rock in general would have lost a very important part of its presence in the past 20 years. That's my summation.
Important? Yes.
But do you all agree, fellow listeners? Are we just full of it? Are you a teenager? And, based off of one of Matt's questions, do you feel the same passion that we feel with listening to American Idiot? Has it aged well? Or are we just full of nostalgia? What do you think would have happened if Cigarettes and Valentines came out instead of American Idiot? Let us know on Facebook, X/Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, YouTube Shorts, @Epic Footnote. Let us know what you think, what could have been in this hypothetical world of Green Day just saying, no, let's find the masters and release Cigarettes and Valentines. Also subscribe to our YouTube channel to hear a lot more episodes like this, as well as a ton of episodes featuring our beloved punk trio, Green Day. And a massive thank you to Lucky 13 Beard Co.
If you haven't done so yet, log on to lucky13beardco.com. If you've never tried a beard balm or oil before, and you've always been kind of curious about it, this is where you're going to want to go to pick up your beard balms and oils. We're even giving you 10% off of your entire order. Throw our brand new Lummy Beard Oil in the cart. It smells like bourbon, tobacco, cola, and leather. It's absolutely amazing. It's going to leave you smelling epic, feeling amazing, and you're going to get 10% off of that order by using the code EFP10 at checkout. Lucky13, the number beardco.com.
Buying our beard oil is a great way to support us, but I get it. You don't have a beard, you don't know anyone with a beard, weird, but there's other ways you can support us too. Go to our Linktree page, Linktree/Epic Footnote, or any link that's in any of our socials. You'll find a link to our merch site where we sell t-shirts, hats, hoodies, coffee mugs with our lovely little logo on it. It's great ways to help us so we can keep making podcast episodes like this, as well as just letting your friends know and self-promote us for, wearing them and good conversation starter. People going, oh, what's that skull with the vinyl eyes? Oh, what's a cool podcast I listen to? Boom, that's how we get more viewers and listeners. And we thank you so much for doing that. We thank you so much for listening. And we hope you join us for another episode real soon.
Don't be an American idiot.